Good afternoon, everyone. This is for La Sierra students enrolled in CJUS 416 Victimology. I'm going to go over Chapter 8 from our textbook. Here is a brief video lecture on Chapter 8, Intimate Partner Abuse. And just a reminder, some of the topics, some of the content might be triggering for some students. So I just want you to be mindful and make sure to get in your self-care. If you need to talk to anyone, if you need some additional support or validation, reach out to your friends. You can reach out to me. I can connect you with some resources. Don't forget, you can reach out via text 741-741. That's the crisis text hotline. And somebody will respond to you right away, and they'll start texting with you. So, but reach out to me if you need assistance with anything or if some of the content is especially painful for you. Okay, so Chapter 8, Intimate Partner Violence. I hope you don't mind. I have my PowerPoint presentation up as well. Some of the things we're going to be talking about is acts of domestic violence, acts of violence, acts of abuse in intimate partner relationships. So let's talk about some terminology. When we talk about intimate partner, partner is a gender neutral term. So we can have individuals that are opposite genders in the same relationship, people that are the same gender in the relationship, and individuals who don't identify with any gender. They might be gender non-conforming or whatever the case may be. But when we talk about intimate partner abuse, partner is gender neutral. So we're no longer talking about couples being only male and female. So please be mindful and aware of that. Okay. Intimate. When we talk about intimate partner abuse, the word intimate refers to individuals who are married, cohabitating, so that means living together, or involved in a serious relationship. This includes couples that are separated and living apart, but they have a history of being intimate with each other. So we're talking about dating relationships, casual relationships, where there might be some intimacy, but there are no titles or classifications or labels involved, right? And then we could be living with our partner. So keep that in mind. Intimate partner abuse. We also address it as intimate partner violence. The last edition of our textbook addressed it as intimate partner violence, and this current edition has it as intimate partner abuse. So keep that in mind. When we talk about intimate partner abuse, I just want to go over some statistics and some information that our textbook shares, okay? Intimate partner abuse. Intimate partner abuse is defined as any intentional act or series of acts that cause injury to the intimate partner, These acts may be physical, emotional, or sexual. Partner is gender neutral, and therefore the abuse may occur to a man, a woman, or maybe even an individual who doesn't identify with any gender. Intimate partner involves those who are married, cohabitating, or involved in a serious relationship like we just described. Let's look at the extent of the problem. Some of these statistics are pretty they're pretty relevant, they're still true. This information was gathered a little bit ago, a few years back, but it's still relative to what we're talking about. The National Violence Against Women survey indicated that approximately 7.7% of the female respondents have been raped by their intimate partner. So not an acquaintance, not a stranger, their intimate partner. This translates into nearly 7.8 million women who have been raped by their intimate partner during their life, okay, their intimate partner. This study also found that 22.1% of all female respondents had been physically assaulted by their partner at some time. That's a pretty high statistic. 22.1% of all female respondents had been physically assaulted by their partner at some time. Now remember, this was a survey, so not every woman was questioned or interviewed, just individuals who participated in this survey and responded. So think of the individuals who didn't respond and what their experiences may have been. When we talk about the dynamics of battering, we rely on the cycle theory of violence, which sets forth the dynamics of battering in intimate partner abuse. And there's 3 distinct phases. We have the tension building stage, the explosion or the acute battery phase, and the calm, loving respite phase. Now, I know some of you might have taken the domestic violence course with Professor Money, and so this may be a repeat for some of you, but for some of us that haven't taken that course, this might be brand new information. So when we talk about the dynamics of battering, we talk about the tension building phase, and it's exactly what it implies. There's an event or series of events, and tension is building within the partners. It could be coming from both, the tension could be coming from both of the partners, or it could be coming from just one of the partners. And then we have what's called the explosion or the acute battering phase. I'm going to take it back a step further, excuse me. When we talk about the tension building phase, one of the things that happens, excuse me, my nose is runny, is what's going on in the mind of the victim. As the tension is building, this may be something common for the victim. And in that case, in this part of the dynamic of battering, the victim may rationalize that perhaps he or she is really at fault and deserves the abuse, accepting the batterer's faulty logic as his or her own. So as the tension is building, as hours or days are going by with the increased tension, as the victim, I'm internalizing this, and I believe that this is perhaps normal, that this is what I'm worthy of because of what I've done or haven't done, and this is my fault, and this is what I deserve, okay? And this is never the case. This is not true at all. This is distorted cognitive thinking. This is not appropriate. No one ever deserves to be abused physically or in any way in their intimate relationships. The explosion or the acute battering phase, as we call it, is just that. It is when the abuser loses control and engages in major incidents of assaultive behavior. So it's an intense, violent aggression that is distinguished from other parts of this phase because it does not take place during the tension building phase. We're building up. Remember early on when we talked about victims and victimization and the role they play in their victimization? We're not blaming the victim. We're not doing that. In a scenario with intimate partners, part of the tension is between the two of them and the way the two interact, the way the two communicate, the way the two respond, the way the two feed off each other. Do they escalate each other, or do they try to de-escalate the situation, right? So we're not blaming the victim, we're identifying the role the victim plays. We are not blaming the victim, right? We're just identifying there's a cycle to all this. After the explosion or the acute battering phase, we now enter what's called the calm, loving respite phase. It's characterized by contrite, loving acts on behalf of the abusing partner. Contrite, loving acts on behalf of the abusing partner. So essentially the abuser is Mr. or Miss Nice Guy or Nice Gal, right? Oh, I'm so sorry, you look so pretty today, how could I ever do that to you? I was having a really bad moment, it will never happen again. I love you, come here, whatever the case may be, right? So we see almost like a honeymoon phase, right? There might be a lot of love and affection, there might be a lot of apologies, there might be some gifts given and received, etc. So we have a cycle of events. We have the tension building phase where things are escalating and building, but there's been no physical acts of aggression. We have an explosion, a physical act of aggression and violence. And then we have the calm, loving respite phase where the abuser engages in contrite, loving acts to get back the victim in their good graces. Something we don't talk a lot about, I don't believe our textbook talks about this. I should have checked earlier. I'm sorry, I did not. Oh, look, another postie, things to do. Lists everywhere. When we talk about the term gaslighting, okay, I'm just looking at our textbook. I don't think, nope, it's not even in here. In any event, the term gaslighting is a psychological manipulation technique that abusers engage in that we don't talk about as much as we should. And it's something that happens not only in intimate relationships, but it happens throughout our life. And in some scenarios, it's probably happening in our society right now, since we're in an election year, right? We're psychologically manipulating others to get them to believe what we want, right? But in any event, gaslighting, when we're talking about intimate partner abuse, acts of domestic violence, violence against intimate partners, it is a psychological form of manipulation. Gaslighting is when we cause a person, so the things that we do or say cause another person to doubt their sanity through the use of psychological manipulation. So a good example is you're with your partner and your partner said and did something, or here, let me take it back. Let's start over. So you are with your partner and you do something to your partner to upset them or anger them, okay? It could be anything. And you and your partner are having a discussion about it, and you don't want to talk about it, or you want to change the narrative, or you want to gain control of the situation. Gaslighting is where I repeatedly tell my partner, no, I didn't say that. I didn't do that. You must have heard that. You must have made that up. You must be delusional. Are you taking your meds? Were you drinking too much? You were probably drunk, and so you just imagined that. I didn't do that at all. I didn't say that at all. And that's the narrative that it evolves into. And then your partner starts to question and wonder, well, wait a minute. Did I really see that? Did I really hear that? Did that really happen? Maybe he or she is right. Maybe I am making this up. Maybe I am delusional. Maybe I need to get back on my meds, or maybe I need to take more meds, or maybe I should quit drinking. So it's a psychological manipulation to compel your partner, to make your partner think that they are losing their sanity, that they are imagining things that didn't happen, that they are making things up, and that they're losing their sanity. That is called gaslighting. Okay, I'm sure some of us have experienced this directly. Maybe some of us have even engaged in this with other people in our lives and we didn't even realize it, right? So gaslighting. When we talk about the dynamics of battering, it's also important to talk about three terminologies, three concepts you need to be aware of. Battering woman syndrome, or battered woman syndrome, Stockholm syndrome, and traumatic bonding theory. Those can be found on pages 144 to 142 of our textbook. Battered woman syndrome, Stockholm syndrome, and traumatic bonding theory. Very quickly, when we talk about battered women's syndrome, it theorizes that victims of spousal abuse gradually become immobilized by fear and believe they have no other options. As a result, these women stay in the abusive relationships, coping the best they can. Battered women's syndrome involves a woman who has been, on at least 2 occasions, the victim of physical, sexual, or serious psychological abuse by a man with whom she has an intimate relationship. Okay, so battered women's syndrome is specific to gender roles in a intimate partner relationship. Okay. I would imagine as time evolves, we are seeing an increase in males as victims of domestic violence and intimate partner violence. We also know it occurs in same gender and non-gender identifying or non-gender conforming relationships. So I'm guessing in time, this terminology is going to change to reflect something to the effect of battered partner syndrome, battered partner, you know, something or other. So I'm sure this will change over time, but historically, we have viewed intimate partner abuse and violence as domestic violence. We have viewed it as an issue between a husband and wife, a man and a woman. So this is where we find terminology and concepts that focus on gender-specific roles, okay? So again, battered woman syndrome involves a woman who has been on at least 2 occasions the victim of physical, sexual, or serious psychological abuse by a man with whom she has an intimate relationship. It is a pattern of psychological symptoms that develop after somebody has lived in a battering relationship. So chances are it would be a situation of violence and abuse that has gone on for an extended period of time. There's probably been more than just gaslighting going on. There's been a lot of violence, aggression, and an abuse of power and control as well. Stockholm Syndrome is a phenomenon that occurs when persons who are held as hostages, captives, or prisoners of war begin to identify with the captors. So identifying with the captor means you might have empathy for them, you might have compassion for them, you might understand why they decided to do what they did by taking hostages. If you're a prisoner of war, Stockholm Syndrome, even if you're not a prisoner of war. I'm going to say more so if you're a prisoner of war, only because you're trained and educated on hostage type situations. Identifying with your captor might be a defense technique or a coping technique, to help you navigate your situation so that maybe you're treated a little differently by your captor, or maybe your captor will find some benevolence and not be harsh with you or be mean or aggressive. Okay. Now we're going to talk about something similar but not identical to, which is called traumatic bonding theory or trauma bond. And we see this a lot in cases where we have cases of human trafficking, child abductions, things like that. Trauma bond theory. So we're learning about intimate partner abuse, and we're learning about violence and aggression in intimate relationships. We're learning about the dynamics of battering. Why would a female or a male or a victim stay in a battering abusive relationship? And that has something to do about traumatic bonding theory, or having a trauma bond with your perpetrator or your trafficker or whoever. It's when a woman finally leaves an abusive partner, her immediate fears begin to diminish and her hidden attachment to her abuser begins to manifest itself. So I'm going to switch out the word woman, because as stated earlier, it's not just women who are being battered, okay, in intimate relationships. It's men, it's people who identify as LGBTQIA+, it's people who don't identify with a gender whatsoever, okay? So, traumatic bonding theory. When a person finally leaves an abusive partner, his or her immediate fears begin to diminish, and his or her hidden attachment to his or her abuser begins to manifest itself. So manifest itself, it means it's starting to show, we're starting to demonstrate, we're starting to identify and recognize how we feel about the person who has been abusing us. As the victim in the battering relationship, we might be emotionally drained and vulnerable, very common, and the person, the victim, becomes susceptible to his or her partner's loving, contrite pressure to return. So we have an emotionally drained and vulnerable victim person, and he or she becomes susceptible to their partner's loving, contrite pressure to return. As his or her fears lessen, the victim, as the victim's fears lessen and the needs previously provided by the partner increase, he or she may decide to give their partner another chance. So basically, I've left my partner, traumatic bonding theory, I've left my partner, my true feelings for my perpetrator, for my abuser, for my trafficker, for whoever that person that's been abusing me may be, my true feelings for that individual are starting to manifest. I'm drained, I'm vulnerable, I'm tired, and my partner is pressuring me to return to him or her. And I'm tired of resisting. And as my fears lessen and as I'm realizing how much I really need my partner because they provide a lot of support, or they provide a lot of financial support, or they're paying the mortgage or the rent, whatever the case may be, I'm tired, I'm drained, my partner's pushing me, I'm scared, my partner can meet my needs, I'm scared I can't meet my needs on my own. I'm gonna go back to my partner because I'm bonded with them. Okay, we might call that a trauma bond. So that is much different than Stockholm Syndrome. Stockholm Syndrome means I am identifying with my captor. I have found some benevolence within them. I have made a connection with them. There's something about them that I understand, that I'm super compassionate and empathetic about. I understand why they're doing what they're doing. I'm not giving them a pass, but I understand. Okay, traumatic bond theory means no, I am so bonded to my abuser that the thought of being without my abuser is so scary that I will go back to my abuser even though it's an abusive, unhealthy, dangerous relationship. Okay, so we have battered women syndrome, Stockholm Syndrome, and traumatic bonding theory. Okay, when we talk about some of the theories as to what causes partner abuse, our textbook gives us 6 different theories to work from: social stress, power, dependency, alcohol, pregnancy, and marriage. Woof. Do they all happen at the same time? In some relationships, absolutely, absolutely, right? So social stress, what are we talking about? We're talking about living up to society's standards, living up to the American dream, trying to achieve the American dream, trying to work, trying to manage a family, trying to manage a marriage or an intimate partner relationship, trying to get in your self-care, trying to study if you're in school, right? All of these social stresses, right? That could be enough in some relationships to trigger an aggressive or volatile or violent event. Absolutely. Power. When we talk about power, we're talking about power and authority. In some relationships, in some intimate relationships, there's a balance of equity and power. And in others, there's a distinct difference. There could be one person who is the breadwinner and the other person stays home. We could have someone who works a very high-paying job and someone who doesn't. We can have someone who's working outside the home, but the other partner is going to school. Obviously, there's a differential there. Someone is relying upon someone else to provide a majority of the support. And sometimes what we find is there's a struggle of power and an imbalance of power. Typically, the greater the imbalance of power, the more likely there is an opportunity for abuse. So more power could potentially equal more abuse, right? Dependency. When we talk about dependency, we're talking about partners being dependent on each other. Do I not work outside of the home and not generate an income, and I rely 100% on my partner to provide an income? That's dependency. Do I depend on my partner to make every single decision for me and I don't make any decisions? I don't even do the grocery shopping? That's dependency. So that level of dependency, the more dependent one is on the other, the more likely there could be for the potential for abuse of power and, unfortunately, intimate partner abuse, okay? So that level of dependency can play a huge role. And just to piggyback onto that, when we're talking about dependency, if you're the individual in the relationship who is making more money, who has the higher level type of employment or career, you could see your dependent partner as a problem. You could have so much resentment and anger towards the partner you're caring for that in and of itself could be enough for you to go into a rage of aggression or violence if that's how you operate in a relationship. When we talk about alcoholism, okay, what we know about alcohol or any mind-altering substance for that matter, our textbook tells us shares with us a couple different points to consider when talking about alcohol. Disinhibition theory. So whenever we're on a mind-altering substance, there is this idea that we lose some inhibition. Our judgment is impaired. We might make judgments and decisions and do things we normally wouldn't do if we were not under the influence of a mind-altering substance. So be mindful when working with families and individuals who've been victimized or who have engaged in intimate partner violence. If any of them are using substances, it definitely will impact their inhibitions and their ability to make sound judgment. And again, we're not blaming. It could be the victim who's drinking and not the abuser, right? We could have a scenario where we have someone who's drinking and they're the victim, and then here we are as the police, we're showing up because we got a call on a domestic disturbance, right? So something to consider. The other aspect with alcohol is that we learn behavior through observation. So if we come from a home where there's alcohol or substance use, if we come from a home where there's violence, or we come from a home where there's both, we are definitely going to pick up on those behaviors, and we are going to learn from all of those behaviors. Conversely, if we are repeatedly exposed to the same type of behavior and drinking and violence, we will eventually start imitating that behavior and that violence because it's what we're exposed to, and repeated exposure would lead us to believe it's something that maybe we should be engaging in or adopt as our own. The third aspect with alcohol or mind-altering substances is there's this societal expectation that with drinking there's debauchery, that with drinking there's some bad behavior, that with drinking there might be a fight or a disagreement between a couple, okay? So that is a societal pressure, a societal expectation or anticipation that we get throughout our lives when it comes to alcohol and mind-altering substances. Remember, alcohol is legal if you're over 21, and it's super easily accessible. It is socially acceptable to drink in various settings. So, if we have a partner who has a problem with alcoholism and violence, and they're having issues with their intimate partner, this could be potentially a recipe for disaster. Not always, but something to consider, okay? When we talk about pregnancy in an intimate partner relationship and as a potential theory on why people batter, we do know what research has shown us. On page 144 of our textbook, we do know that in relationships where there's a history of intimate partner violence and the female is pregnant, we do see higher rates of intimate partner violence. So a couple with a history of intimate partner violence, the female is pregnant, we do see an increase of violence in intimate partner relationships. So be mindful of that. And that was from the National Family Violence Survey, again, page 144 of our textbooks. We also know that young women get pregnant at higher rates than women who are older. That's just a fact, and that's kind of part of biology and science. But additionally, generally speaking, removing pregnancy as a variable, young women in general, especially under the age of 25, are at an increased risk for experiencing violence, okay? So young women outside of intimate partner abusing relationships, right? Young women, particularly under the age of 25, are at a higher risk to experience violence, period. And then you factor in variables like she might be in an intimate partner relationship, she might be pregnant, there might be a history of abuse and violence. That female, because of her age and because what we know about the statistics I just shared, she's more likely to experience intimate partner violence the younger she is, if she's pregnant and in a relationship and there's a history of that type of behavior, okay? And then marriage. The last theory we talk about, our textbook talks about, is marriage. This was an interesting quote that I got from our textbook that I thought was funny, but it's really not funny. And I think it's funny because my husband and I, when we were married, we used to joke about this, but it's really not funny. It's our textbook on page 144, there's a quote: "The marriage license is a hitting license." And it is not. And if you want to know the joke that my husband and I used to share, when we would get annoyed with each other or we were disagreeing, we would joke with each other and say, "I'm going to revoke your marriage license." And it just, this saying made me think of that. No, I was not in an abusive relationship, and either was my husband, but a marriage license is not a hitting license. And believe it or not, there was a time in our criminal justice history where law enforcement believed that. Where law enforcement believed that domestic violence was a family issue, that spousal assault was a misdemeanor offense, that was a family issue, and that domestic violence is sometimes a woman's issue. Okay, this was some of the thinking that was harbored historically throughout criminal justice when it came to domestic violence. And it wasn't until the last 30 years we have really changed our tune. And O.J. Simpson and the murder of Nicole and her friend Ron Goldman, Nicole Brown Simpson and her friend Ron Goldman, that case really lit a flame under state legislators to create more definitive laws as it comes to mandatory arrests for domestic perpetrators of intimate partner abuse and domestic violence. We'll talk about that in a second. But unfortunately, yes, this was a thought that was harbored by law enforcement at one time. We no longer engage in that thought. We understand that domestic violence is intimate partner abuse. It happens between same-gendered couples, opposite-gender couples, non-identifying gendered couples, and it's not a family issue, it's not a women's issue, it's not spousal assault, it's real, and it needs attention. Which takes me into our criminal justice response to intimate partner abuse. So let me just touch base on O.J. Simpson since I brought it up. So prior to the murder of Nicole Brown Simpson and Ron Goldman, domestic violence laws in the state of California were as such that when officers responded to a call of domestic violence, if the victim did not appear to have any physical injuries, no arrests were made, okay? So one victim, no visual injuries, no arrest. Think about the message and the perceptions that are passed on to the perpetrator and the victim. I'm going to give you a moment to think about that. So prior to O.J. Simpson, in California, if officers responded to a call of domestic violence and the victim had no visible injuries, no arrest was made. So that meant no arrest was made, police show up, they leave, and the couple is left alone again or without police supervision. Do we have any ideas what might happen in that house? Yeah, probably some scary stuff, right? A pissed off husband or partner, right? A hysterical victim who's scared more so than he or she was before they called the police, right? A pretty scary situation. One of the good things that came out of the O.J. Simpson and Nicole Brown Simpson and Ron Goldman case was that as a result of that, there was a change in California legislation to where mandatory arrests were mandated if officers respond to a call of domestic violence and whether or not they see a physical mark on a victim, someone's going to jail. And in some cases, it's both the victim and the offender, the perpetrator, the abuser, that go to jail, because at the time of arrival, the police could not decide who was the victim and who was the perpetrator. Okay, so we have mandatory arrest. So let's take a moment and think about the message that an arrest sends to the victim and the abuser when law enforcement show up and respond to a call of domestic violence. To the victim, they're probably thinking, oh, thank goodness, I don't have to deal with my abuser for the next how many hours or days or whatever. Very good. To the abuser, if I'm the abuser and I get arrested, I might be angry. It might escalate my reaction. I might turn on the police. I don't know. Or I could just accept the arrest and move forward and be like, okay, now I gotta, pay the consequence or whatever. So it sends a message, right? But it also means that if someone is arrested, they get an opportunity to post bail, right? So we arrest someone, they go to jail, and they post bail. Do they go back to the same house they were in when they were abusing their partner, or do they go to a new home? Well, it depends. Did we get a temporary restraining order? Did we get an emergency restraining order? What did we get? What provisions do we have to protect ourselves? So it's a very challenging situation when we arrest, when we don't arrest, right? One of the things when we talk about criminal justice response to intimate partner by abuse are the factors affecting police responses to arrest. So for example, we've talked in the, different class, our own personal bias, our personal opinions and beliefs. I've said this before. If we work in criminal justice and we have a personal belief or opinion about something and it does not coincide with our agency's policies and procedures, then we need to leave our opinions at the door before we start our shift. We cannot mingle the two, because we are not being hired to enforce our opinion. We are being hired to enforce the law. We are being hired by a government agency to do the job, because the leader of that agency cannot do it on their own. They need other people below them to help them do the job. So that means that if you have a bias, an implicit bias, or a specific bias, and you are using that to cloud your judgment or influence your discretion when it comes time to arrest an offender, you're not doing your job efficiently or appropriately. Okay, so things like implicit bias, unconscious bias, we are always influenced as criminal justice practitioners as to what the law says, what our department or agency policy is. And remember, some of those old school philosophies of domestic violence as a family issue, spousal assault, and a women's issue, we have got to knock that out of our thought process, because that is not true. And if we harbor those thoughts, we are only feeding into the negative thoughts about domestic violence and intimate partner abuse. That it's only between men and women, and it only happens to women, and it's only a family issue, and we don't want to get involved. Nope, nope, nope. The other thing that affects police response when responding to calls of intimate partner abuse or domestic violence, it is one of the most dangerous calls we could ever go on as a criminal justice practitioner. We're dealing with emotions, we're dealing with someone's relationship, we're dealing with livelihood, right? Arresting someone means you remove them from their home. If they have a job, they can't work. If they have a family they take care of, they can't take care of their family. If they have a family member they're the caregiver for, like say an older family member who's reliant on them, who's going to take care of that person? Who's going to take the kids back and forth to school and soccer? So those definitely are factors that arresting officers might have in their mind when they're about to arrest someone or they're faced with the decision to arrest someone. Whenever we take someone into custody and we arrest them, we are potentially changing their life trajectory. That arrest is potentially changing so many other factors in their life. It potentially has a rippling effect. We're not taking away responsibility or accountability from the offender, but when we do arrest someone, we are aware this is what could potentially happen to them, okay? And again, domestic violence calls, calls of intimate partner abuse, the most dangerous calls we can respond to, always go with a partner, always be prepared, and always, always, always have resources available and officers on standby if need be, because you want to go home at the end of your shift too. All right. When we talk about the arrest of abusers, again, we are sending messages to the abusers. We are sending messages to the victims, right? Again, when we talk about arresting abusers, sometimes we have victims, they reach out to law enforcement for help. Law enforcement shows up, and when their abuser is about to be arrested, all of a sudden, we don't want him or her arrested. Victim does not want to proceed. And there could be a million reasons, and we don't even begin to try to understand, because who knows. But just for the sake of it,